Today on Outlook from the BBC World Service, a pivotal moment in Olympic history. Mexico City, 1968.
200-metre field ever assembled at the Olympic Games. Peter Norman did get a good start, I thought. Smith is doing well. His leg seems to be standing up okay. Look at Carlos go in the centre of the field, and Questad is not beaten by any means. Peter Norman running...
The black American athletes Tommy Smith and John Carlos took the gold and bronze medals.
Olympic victory ceremony, 200 metres, men.
As they stood on the podium, watched by millions of TV viewers around the world, the two men each raised a black-gloved fist in an unmistakable black power salute. They wore symbolic beads around their necks and black socks without shoes on their feet, and John wore a black T-shirt to cover his USA team vest. The protests sent shockwaves around the world and brought this apology from the American Olympic authorities.
The United States Olympic Committee expresses its profound regrets to the International Olympic Committee, to the Mexican Organizing Committee, and to the people of Mexico for the discourtesy displayed by two members of its team.
Well, in the build-up to the 2012 Olympics, John Carlos is in London and has been reliving those dramatic events. When he came to the Outlook studio, he started by telling me about growing up in New York's Harlem district. As a kid, he didn't want to be a runner at all. His ambition was to be a swimmer.
Well, what happened was I heard about this guy swimming English Channel, and I wanted to do it. You know, I had questions like, if the guy is swimming in his channel, Daddy, is sharks. Does he swim with a knife in his mouth? What happens when he needs to go to the bathroom? I'm trying to fill the gaps, because I really want to do this. And then along the way, I heard them mention on the radio about the Olympic Games. Hey, Pop, what's the Olympics? He said, well, son, that's where all the nations of the world come together. They bring their sports men and women in to see who's more superior physically. I said, do they have swimmers? He said, yes. I said, do they have any black swimmers? He said, no, son. And I went around from that point on boasting, I'm going to be the first black swimmer to represent America.
And what stopped that happening?
Well, what happened was I actually went on with this theory for like 8 months, 10 months. And then one day my father saw that it wasn't going to lead me. And he said, son, we need to have a talk. And he told me, he said, I hate to mess up your dreams, your wishes. He said, but you'll never make it to the Olympics as a swimmer. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said to me, he said, well, son, where would you train? A swimmer trains 3 times a day. Where would you train? He said, you can't go to the Harlem River. You lose your friends every summer. You can't go to the public pool. Everybody's trying to cool off. You can't go to the ocean. The water's too rough. And just as he's saying it, I'm thinking, well, I'll join a club. And he said, no, son, you can't join a club. And I said, we can't afford it? He said, no. And he went and he rubbed his hand, like I thought he had a bug bite or something, right. And he was referring to the fact that merely because of the color of your skin, you wouldn't be able to join the club.
So the swimming clubs were for white people only?
For whites only, right. But he knew right away. He said, when you and your buddies go up there to the High Bridge Pool and you go get in the water, what happens? And it wasn't but seconds. Realized right away that as soon as we hit the water, the white parents would jump up and call their kids out of the water. So right then, it started, impacting my mind in terms of it's a difference. It's a difference how you're treated.
Were you angry?
I don't think I had any anger in me. It was more like understanding, trying to fill the voids to make sense of it. It wasn't, how you going to get angry about something you don't understand,
What about running? How did running feel to you at the time? I mean, what did you use running for? Was it sport?
Running was just something kids did. There was no emphasis on running that it would take me anywhere. I was just running. As a young man, when I met Malcolm X and was walking with him, actually, he was walking fast.
You met Malcolm X in Harlem?
Jogging, yes, sir.
What age were you?
At that time, I think I was around like 13, 12, somewhere around there.
Right,
maybe
so he was
14.
walking down the street?
Well, what happened is when he came to New York, he was heading up the mosque in New York. And I heard him speak on the radio prior to him coming to New York. And I was just fascinated by what he was saying and how strong he was saying it. And when he came to New York on 116th Street, I was compelled to go. And I told my father I want to go down and check him out. And when I went down there, I was electrified by, things he had to say and the wisdom that he had. So I stuck around after the second time and asked him, is it possible that I could go with him from one location to the next? And he looked at me, he smiled, he said, why you want to go with me? I told him, I said, well, I want to learn. I want to ask questions. And he liked that. And he told me, he said, yeah, you come on. He said, just make sure you can keep up. Now, when he said keep up, you slid off me. I wasn't paying attention. But he was a very fast walker. So you had to actually jog to keep up with him.
And what did you want to ask him?
Why does he tell black people they need to stand on their own? Why don't they stand on their own for themselves? Why do you have to be a reminder for them? And tell you that you have a right to have fair housing. You have a right to have an opportunity to go to any university. Where you didn't have a whole bunch of black people saying those things and encouraging you and building faith in yourself, belief in yourself that you can accomplish these goals. So he was one that was going against the grain early in my life. And I realized he was going against the grain. I like that, the fact that he was independent.
But I was trying to understand the role of running in your life and when running became a serious activity for you.
Well, it became serious. I used to hit the freight trains over in the Bronx because there was a lot of people after the drug epidemic. There was a lot of husbands missing in action that wasn't involved in the house. I was fortunate that I had mom and dad in my house. So, we had food in our box. But a lot of the kids that I went to school with didn't have food, didn't have clothes. And the freight trains was coming in every day with all these products. It was almost like they knew it was there. They believed in the law, and they didn't have enough faith in themselves in terms of doing what was necessary to survive in this world.
So did you go and steal from the freight trains?
So, yes, we would go break in the freight trains and steal the stuff and bring it back and give it to the people in the community. And by doing that, I would have to run from the police. The police would chase us across the 155th Street Bridge. They would catch some of my buddies. I was shocked that the Irish police was so fast because most of them were portly. They were kind of fat. They had the gun belt on, the whole 9 yards, but they could truck. And it was two black detectives in Harlem, Mr. Lester and Mr. Bryan. Mr. Bryan was about maybe 6'6". Mr. Lester was about 6 feet, 5'11", somewhere around there. And they knew my father, because my father used to have little poker games and so forth, and all the baseball players and police and everybody used to come through there. And they said to me, my dad said, Earl, there's been some break-ins, and we think that Johnny's involved in it, and you need to talk to him. And my father stopped him and said, no, you need to talk to him. And they came in and they found me and a couple of my buddies and told my buddies to sit down. They took me in the middle of the field. And they said, you have a talent. But we want to tell you something before we tell you about this talent. There's been some break-ins in them freight trains. We think we know who's doing it. And they leaned into my face and said, and we can't do anything until we catch him. And we're going to catch him. In other words, you better back up. And then Mr. Bryan said to me, he said, well, Mr. Lester has something more important he want to tell you. And Mr. Lester looked at me, he said to me, he said, you have a talent. He said, you're a runner. And when he said I was a runner, I smirked. He like, so I took that to say, everybody in the neighborhood runs. And they said, no, you're special. And they gave me a number to the New York Pioneer Club and told me, say, Monday, you call them. And I called, and that's how my track career got started, actually.
Well, now, you got a scholarship, didn't you, to East Texas State University.
Yes.
You got married when you were 19. You had a daughter 9 months afterwards, and you went down to Texas with your family. What sort of a reception did you get in Texas as a black man?
To me, the South was like Mississippi, Alabama, New Orleans, Arkansas, but not Texas. And when I went to Texas and I landed, the first thing I noticed when I landed in the airport, they had white restroom and colored. And I could see a distinct difference. The white restroom was pristine. You could cook eggs on the floor. The black restroom was dirty, it was filthy, with water running, gnats and flies everywhere. And then I noticed that they had two different water fountains. And then when the coach came, my name changed from John Carlos to Boy. He called me Boy a number of times, and I felt pretty much offended that he was calling me this because I had a wife and a daughter with me. And he called me Boy, so I told him, I said, Coach, my name is John Carlos. I had to tell him this a number of times. And before he would call me by my name, he called me this other name called Nigra. And I never heard that word, and it sounds so much like the other word, like the N word. And I took offense to it. And I remember my wife telling me, she said, no, baby, I don't think he said that. I said, well, it's damn close. He better be careful. But when I got into town, I realized that I was in the Deep South in terms of the good old boys and the way they thought. And then at the same time, in terms of how intimidated the blacks from the area, how they were. It was almost like it was automatic thing, and the attitude was, well, this is just the way it is down here. And my attitude coming out of Harlem, New York, now that's not just the way it is, and I'm not going to settle for them disrespecting my wife, my kids, and myself.
Did you do something about it?
Well, I raised hell when certain instances took place. Okay, my main apparatus was to protect my family as best I could. And I'm young, you be a young individual in a situation like that, you have to be concerned about you can lose everything too. And if someone get out of line with your wife or your kid, which I had a situation where a white fella screamed at my daughter and called all kind of obscenities and so forth because his daughter and my daughter were playing together. And he got pissed off that his daughter was playing with this little so-called nigger. And he raged. Now, when he raged at my daughter didn't have a clue what the man was saying, but just the way he did it sent her home crying. And when I went out there and had to deal with this guy, it dawned on me that I'm going to have to get out of here because the coaches racist, some of the faculty is racist, and the neighbors are racist. So I had to consider maybe I better leave before I get myself in a situation where I can't get out of it because I have to take someone's life and then my whole life is gone.
So you headed back to Harlem eventually, didn't you? And this was in the build-up to the 1968 Olympics.
Yes,
and I think you found yourself at a meeting where Martin Luther King suddenly walked in.
And I went in the hotel. Most times a kid grew up in New York, they don't go downtown in the hotels. We didn't have no business. And I went in this hotel and I sat there to gather myself before I was going to the location. And I'm looking around at the chandeliers and the pictures and the sofas and saying, man, I could take all this stuff to my mother, because my mother was like a perfectionist and loved furniture and the whole 9 yards. The type of woman, she'll put the plastic on the sofa and you got to wait 10 years before you can sit on the plastic, that kind of mom, So then I gathered myself and I went to the desk and I asked, do you have a location for SCLC? I didn't even have a clue what SCLC was. Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
Right.
Okay, that was Dr. King's
his organization.
Organization, right. And I went upstairs and I knocked on the door, and there was a guy opened the door up that I was very familiar with. It was Dr. Young, Andrew Young. Anyway, he was very cordial and invited me in, and I see luminaries, you might say, from the past, you see on TV. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself that, hey, man, you kind of like out of your league, And then all of a sudden one of the rooms opened and Dr. King walked out. And when he walked out, man, literally my lip, must have fell in my lap. Just in a...
You just weren't expecting to see him?
Oh, no.
And this was against the background of discussions about a possible boycott by African-American athletes of the Olympics.
That's exactly what the meeting was entailed.
Right. And that's what Dr. King had come to talk to you about.
He felt that a boycott would be something that would be a sounding board for the world, to let the world know that, hey, man, things are not as good as the picture might presented itself, that there's some issues that we need to come together to address. And we're not trying to, slight America or slight the general public in terms of competition as much as we're trying to bring attention to the plight of people of color in the United States and the world for that matter. So after the meeting was over, he asked, did I have any questions? And I remember in the meeting he had made a statement about they sent him a letter and told him they had a bullet with his name on it. He wouldn't have to wait for it. So, quite naturally, a man tell you that sticks in your brain. Somebody's telling you you're going to die and you still going to stay on course. So when the meeting was over, he asked me, did I have any questions? I told him I had a couple of questions. The question was, Dr. King, why would you go back to Memphis if they threaten your life? And, I'm looking in his eyes, man. I used to wear shades all the time, and I would pull my shades down because I don't want to look in his eyes through glass. I want my eyeballs to see his eyeballs. And he says, I have to go back and stand for those that can't stand for themselves, and I have to go back and stand for those that won't stand for themselves. So he said, I have to go and stand for all of those individuals. And when he said that to me, my life became like full circle, because I've been doing this all my life from the time I was a little kid, but I never had a title or a phrase or anything that I can put on it until he actually made that statement. And I'm looking in his eyes, and I'm looking in his eyes for fear. And through my eyes, looking in his eyes, all I saw was love coming from the man. And there's no way in the world that he could never thought that he didn't have concern about his life. But, he told me through it all, he said, John, they can kill me, but they can't kill me. You know, he said they can take my life, but they can never take my vision, my dream away.
Well, of course, they did take his life.
Well, they took his life, but, you know, he lives strong in death than he did when he was breathing.
Let's move on to the Olympics then. The boycott didn't happen. You found yourself going to the Olympics. Did you have in mind, as you were travelling there, a definite protest? Did you have something in mind?
What I had in mind, the fact that I was disenchanted, the fact that the boycott was called off. At the quarter semi, I got a hold of Tommy Smith and told Tommy that I was disenchanted about the fact that
Tommy was your fellow runner.
Absolutely right. He's the actual gold medal winner. I said to him, I want to make a statement. What's your take on that? He said, I'm with you. When he said he was with me, for seconds, the demonstration was put on hold, and I focused on the medal. He can have the gold medal. I wasn't there for the gold medal. I was there primarily for the demonstration. And I felt very strong that it had to be two people. It couldn't have been him by himself. It couldn't be me by myself.
Why did you think that?
Well, because they write you off as being crazy, and they would have buried you. But I thought about the race. More important that Tommy should have the race, because the race doesn't mean anything to me. The medal doesn't mean anything. But I knew at the same time I had to have a medal to get on the victory stand.
So you wanted to be on the podium?
Oh, we had to be on the podium in order to accomplish the mission. And from that point on, we decided what artifacts we had. He said he had gloves, bring them. I said I had beads, bring them. He said he had a black scarf, bring it. I had a black shirt, bring it.
Why did he have gloves?
I think he bought the gloves originally because he didn't want to shake Avery Brandish's hands.
This is the head of the Olympic Committee.
Absolutely.
Who he thought was a racist.
Well, not thought was racist, was a known racist. Like we thought it was evident.
So he bought the gloves because he knew he'd be forced to
Well, Avery Brandish was
hands.
supposed to come out and give us the medals. And then when they got wind that something was going to go down, then they kind of changed things around.
And what was the symbolism of the beads?
For lynching. Lynchings that had taken place in the South. You know, my expectations of what happened in history, let's say in the maiden voyage, there was so many individuals, man, that was thrown overboard that no one ever said a prayer for. Well, in the South, when they hung a lot of individuals in the South through the various lynchings and homicides that they committed down there, atrocities, no one said prayers for those individuals either. So the beads was in remembrance of those individual souls that died in the wake of all this hatred that's going on in society.
And you decided also to take your shoes off, didn't you?
Well, we took the shoes off to illustrate the poverty that was taking place in the United States. You sit back and think about America was the greatest country in the world, that the fact that they just send a missile up to the moon and walk the moon, the whole 9 yards, we can't stop cockroaches and rats in the ghetto, but we can go to the moon. So it was a travesty that America could focus on those things and not focus on the less fortunate. So we had a concern about them that, you know, people were still walking the South 10, 20 miles a day to and from school with no shoes. I mean, this is America. We're supposed to have better than that. And I wore a black shirt over my USA jersey for sorrow and sadness. I was ashamed of America.
Well, now, the authorities sent Jesse Owens, the legendary athlete, the man who'd won gold medals at the 1936 Olympics. They sent him to talk to you before the race to try and talk you out of this protest, didn't they?
Yes.
What did he say to you?
Well, first of all, he told us that we should be honored that they allowed us to represent America in the Olympic Games. And then, you know, through my mind, I think about my dad being in the First World War and many individuals that in the Second, the Korean War. And then when they come back into the United States, they were treated as second-class citizens. So when Jesse come in and say we should be honored, yeah, we should be honored, but they should be honored as well. And then, you know, I had to remind Jesse, say, Jesse, what did you do when you got back after 36? I said, if I remember correctly, you couldn't feed your family. You had to go run against a four-legged horse to feed your family. I said, they used to hustle you into the back of the union halls to go in and give a speech. They never let you stop to get a cup of coffee or a sandwich. They'll hustle you back out. I say, had you stood up in 36, maybe I wouldn't have to stand up in 64. Jesse Owens, you have to take into account, was old school. It was a revolution of new mindset that came in the 60s.
This is 1968, a time of protest, a time of turbulence.
Absolutely. And our attitude was that time has run out. He asked us, why do we use, after the games, he asked, why'd you guys use false props, talking about like the gloves? And we told him, well, man, it's the first time the thing has ever been Technicolor. We want them to represent.
On the TV.
Right. This is the first time they put color in for the Olympics. And we said we wanted to make sure they understood that we were representing America, but we was representing Black America first.
Now, what was the idea behind the salute itself? Because some people afterwards described it as a sort of Nazi salute, didn't they?
Well, you know, that was total ignorance in terms of the individuals that did that.
But you both raised your arms above your heads. Why did you do that?
Well, I raised my arm like so.
That was your left arm.
That's right.
Halfway up.
And that's why they thought it was like we was communists and everything, because I had my left hand up.
And Tommy raised his arm all the way up,
Tommy
didn't
had his all the way up, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference in our environment. You know, I'm out of Harlem, New York, and I was raised all the time never to expose myself to the point where I can't protect myself. So that's why my thing was up. So if anybody rushed me, I'm going to get a clock on them one time.
Can I hit him?
There you go. That's right. I'm going to come down to the elbow or something. But before there's a fist, there's an open hand. And that open hand is 5 continents, okay, of various ethnic groups. Now here, we had a button on our chest that said Olympic Project for Human Rights. And it didn't say Olympic Project for Black rights. It said for humanity, for all rights. But if we come together, unite ourselves in our thought process of trying to resolve this issue, then we become a very powerful force. And that's where the fist came from in terms of unity. They took it and tried to make it a Black power situation. If you sit back and you think, say, well, what do you know in your life and time that has had the longevity of that demonstration? Nothing. And that tells me 44 years later that God himself said, we will convert this thing back to its original cause. The original cause was for human rights.
Well, that's the explanation now, but at the time there was a terrible reaction, wasn't there? I mean, there was booing in the stadium.
You sit back and think about when we had, that demonstration, there was only the right-wing press. Oh, these guys are militant. These guys are trying to overthrow the government. These guys are leftists. These guys are traitors to their country. And they influence people's opinions more than people had an opportunity to sit down and digest and use their own mindset to figure out what it was. And then at the same time, take into account that it was something that no one has ever seen before in the history of this planet. And then it was right in your face. So people were totally confused about which way to go.
And it had a bad effect on your life, didn't it? Because you came back, you couldn't find work.
Well, I couldn't find work, but at the same time, there was many people before me that couldn't find work, and there was many people with me that couldn't find work. But I grew up with people all around me having hard times. So it was no bad thing that I couldn't find work. I knew if I stayed to the guns and stayed to beliefs. See, I had a vision when I was a kid. God showed me the same thing that took place 15 years later in Mexico City. He showed me when I was 7 or 8 years old. I'm in a stadium, forum I called it, and people was yippee-ki-yay, happy about something I did. He never showed me what I did, and didn't show me as a teenager, didn't show me as an adult. He showed me as a 7-year-old, 8-year-old kid. So in terms of what was happening out there in the victory stand, I had a chance to flash back. I had a chance to flash back on my father's stories from the First World War. I had a chance to flash back on the meeting that I had with Dr. King. I had a chance to say, oh, that's what that vision was about, because this was actually live, taking place 15 years later. So relative to the things that God told me, you stand fast for what you believe in, I got you in my hands. That's why, people look at me and say, well, man, I looked at you on the victory stand. I looked at Mr. Smith. He looked like he was real tensed up and tight. You looked like you were strolling through the park. I said, it was a stroll through the park for me, because I truly feel that it was the right thing to do. No ifs, ands, and buts about it.
But as your life became more difficult in the years that followed, I mean, for example, your wife, you eventually split up with your wife. She committed suicide. Did you ever regret what you had done? Were there times when you looked in the mirror and you thought, I wish I'd never taken part in that?
No, only thing that I had sorrow for is that as a young individual, you think that you covered all ends, all angles. And the only thing that I regret is the fact that I didn't think it all the way through in terms of how to protect my wife and my kids better. Being young, I think I dropped the ball on that, and that's something that I deal with on a constant basis. Other than that, I don't think I'd add or take anything away. But even with that, the outcome is, if my wife had to die 1,000 times over, and my kids had to endure what they had to endure in school 1,000 times over, or if I'd have had to die 1,000 times over, I'd have did that demonstration every day for 1,000 times before I would try and change anything, because it was necessary to do. It's still necessary for people to step up and make statements about what's happening in this society if we want to make this a better world for all individuals.
John Carlos. He's written a book about his experiences called The John Carlos Story.